Thank you very much. That's a lovely surprise. I appreciate very much. Being an editor, however, you'll forgive me if I edit one of the things in the introduction. I did not win a George Polk Award. The staff won one when I was the bureau chief there. Very important distinction. Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here this morning, and I think we have a few minutes left while I can still call it morning. You'll have some time to ask me some questions later, but if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a few to start out. Before today's program, how many of you had ever heard of the Associated Press, or AP? Ooh, that's good. Okay. How many of you think of it as an American news organization? Okay. How many of you think it has some connection to the U.S. government? Okay. How many of you think it has some connection to the A&P grocery store chain? You'd be surprised. Let me spend a few minutes talking about the AP just to get us started. Okay, the slide's not working. There we go. First, we are the world's oldest and largest news gathering organization. There are more than 3,000 reporters, photographers, video journalists, editors, and producers working out of 243 different bureaus in 97 countries around the world. And everything I talk to you about today is going to be multimedia. So even when I say reporting, I mean working in all formats and all kinds of storytelling. Some of the places where we work are pretty dangerous, like Iraq, where 6 of our people have been killed in the last 5 years, at least half of them murdered simply because they were journalists. But AP has always been in the dangerous places. Our very first casualty was at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876. Wherever we operate, our enduring goal is to be first and to be right. But in a race between first and right, we choose to be right. That has given AP a solid global reputation for reliability and fairness that has earned us 49 Pulitzer Prizes over the years. 30 of those were for photography, some of the most iconic images of the last century, and you'll see 2 here. So what is the AP? It's actually a not-for-profit cooperative owned by 1,500 US newspapers and has no relationship whatsoever with the US government, or the A&P chain for that matter. We were born when a group of New York newspaper editors decided to pool resources to get coverage of the US war in Mexico. That was 161 years ago. But we do much more than cover war, pestilence, famine, and other bad things. The AP also counts the votes in US elections. And yes, that is one big hairy job. We've been preparing for election 2008 for more than 2 years, building on work that has been done by the AP staff for decades. The AP's world headquarters are in New York, over on the west side, not so far from here. And we have substantial regional headquarters in London, Bangkok, Mexico City, Tokyo, and Cairo. We deliver news in every format, every day, to people in 121 different countries. Those 3,000 journalists I mentioned have 1,100 colleagues who handle the complex technical, administrative, and financial responsibilities that keep us going and keep us vibrant. Their work helps keep journalists in some of the most hard-to-reach places on the globe. Havana, Cuba. Pyongyang, North Korea, where we're the only Western news agency to have a presence. And most recently, we opened a 3rd bureau in China in the southern city of Guangzhou. Those of you who are older may remember it as Canton. We are the only Western news organization based in that hub of China's manufacturing. The goods made near Guangzhou are sent all over the world, and so are AP stories, sounds, and images, reaching more than half of the world's population every single day. Now, some of you are thinking, man, AP is the mother of all mainstream media organizations. And you may not pay that may not be a compliment in your world. It may be that we are, but just because we are big and old doesn't mean we are boring and stuffy. And here is one example. The concept of citizen journalism, regular people contributing to journalism, has gotten a lot of buzz in the last couple of years as something brand new. But it's not new to the AP. We've been using content from non-journalists for a very long time. Let me show you some famous photos, most from your lifetime, and all taken by average people, distributed to the world by AP. On April 19, 1995, Charles Porter dashed to the Oklahoma City Federal Building soon after it was blown to bits. He shot this heartbreaking photo, which AP sent to the world. And then the world grieved for little Bailey Allman, 1 year and 1 day old, who died of her terrible injuries. This is a frame grab from a video taken by a person driving near Charles de Gaulle Airport north of Paris as the Concorde took off full of fuel and suddenly ablaze. The plane, bound for New York, crashed into a hotel moments later, and 113 people died. No need to explain this image. Or this one, also taken by an average person on a very unaverage day in September 6 years ago. Scott Lieberman is a doctor and a space buff who lives in Tyler, Texas. Excuse me. On a February morning in 2003, when Space Shuttle Columbia was headed back to Florida, Scott stepped into his backyard to photograph it streaking across the East Texas sky. When he heard a sonic boom a few minutes later, he knew something was wrong and looked more closely at the digital images in his camera. What he captured was the shuttle breaking into pieces, images distributed by the AP and seen by more than 2.5 billion people in the first year after they were taken alone. And from a commuter's cell phone in London, riders walking silently through the tube tunnels following the deadly bombings in July of 2005. Cell phones and teeny tiny digital cameras are everywhere, and so are the places where people can post or publish them. The tools are fantastic, but they only capture and transmit facts and information, and they aren't a substitute for curiosity and intelligence, thinking, probing, and determination. And those, ladies and gentlemen, those are the skills you need most to be a good journalist. If you will allow me an alliterative device, you need curiosity, critical thinking, courage, and confidence. Curiosity. You know, you ought to be wondering a lot. Why is that happening? How did this get this way? What's that all about? New Yorkers are famously immune to the odd and the strange. You see something weird, you just keep walking. That is not a great instinct for a journalist. You must be curious. You also need critical thinking skills. You need the ability to look at a situation and ask if it makes sense and what people will most want to know about it. And then you go get the answer for them. You have to look for the stories that are outside the buildings and far from the officials that are the main players in way too much journalism. Follow a train of logic. Now, if you're a student and you can find a course in logic, go take it. Courage. And by that, I don't just mean personal courage, going into a dangerous situation. Most journalists really don't go to war zones or solve crimes. No, I mean the courage to ask question after question after question after question, even if it makes you look dumb as a post. Ask questions until you understand the situation well enough to explain it. Your job is not to look good to the people you are interviewing. Your job is to explain things to readers and viewers. And confidence. You need the confidence to challenge what you are hearing, even if it seems to make sense. This may shock you, but some people lie. Sometimes they tell big lies, and sometimes they tell little lies, and sometimes they mean to lie to you, and sometimes they just get away from themselves because they're talking to a journalist. Don't take what you hear at face value. Challenge what doesn't make sense. Check facts elsewhere. Triangulate. This isn't a confrontation. You don't have to be a jerk, you know. But you're a scientist in search of facts, and you are going to get there step by methodical step. You must also have a solid understanding of how governments and economies and businesses and societies operate, and not just in the United States, all around the world. If you're not planning to excuse me, if you are planning to study some of those subjects here in college, then change your plan. You need to get smart about the mechanics of the world. If you're not, you're much too easily spun, and you'll spend your career doing inch-deep stories that may get published, but are ultimately useless. Know the law. It's really, really, really important that you know the law. And I don't mean the law that's going to keep you from getting thrown in jail by a police officer if you happen to step over a crime scene tape. I mean know what your rights are to information. You are a fool if you go into this business not understanding what information is public and what is not. Providing public information to the public is hard work, and many public officials and employees would just rather not do it. 9/11 and the threat of terrorism has given many of them the perfect excuse to just say no to perfectly legitimate requests from both journalists and citizens. Those citizens have a right to know what the government they pay for is doing on their behalf. And there's that phrase, right to know. It gets kind of jingoistic in the journalism community, but it's very fundamental. It's just a reminder that all governments are public institutions. Their actions, their decisions, their pieces of paper, everything belongs to the people they serve. Those citizens have a right to ask questions of those governments and expect answers. And journalists have every right to ask questions on behalf of those citizens and expect answers too. And that's another key point about this business. You must see yourself as an advocate for the readers, those citizens. If you're contemplating journalism as an avenue of personal expression, get out of journalism school right now. Change your major. Leave the room. I'm serious. There are other places for you to express your views about the world as it passes by you. It ain't in journalism, though. Journalism is hard work, and the things that I just described are not for the faint of heart or for the observational. If you want to find things out and tell people, if you want to understand why they happen or why they don't, if you want to get excited, if you get excited at the prospect of telling someone something they didn't know, and it may impact how they live their life or make decisions every day, then journalism is the career for you. Yes, it's hard work, but for the right people, it's a glorious profession. It absolutely is the most wonderful way to make a living that I can think of. So my question is not whether journalism is right for you. My question is whether you are right for journalism. Now, I'll be glad to take your questions. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Sonia Valentine, and I'm studying journalism at Brooklyn College.
Great.
And I don't see this in the program, and perhaps you could give me a little direction. I'm interested in travel journalism, and how do I get a foot in there?
There are very few full-time travel writers in the daily news business. There are plenty of specialized publications, but most that I know of are freelancers. I think your best bet is to get clips by doing some pieces, but I'll just add my own little. I think there is a real need for more accurate, fair travel writing. You read a lot of travel writing that is all about how wonderful a place is, and it's, you don't hear nearly enough about how everybody on the tour, the cruise ship, barfed their way across the Caribbean, And both things can be true, but in order to be credible, you want to bring the same journalism skills that you're learning to travel writing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I desire to eventually work as an international correspondent. What advice could you give me to start off in that career?
A lot of people are able to travel and have the ability to go and work in a different country and can hook up as what's called a local hire in the parlance, and that's a good way to start. Another good way to start is to work for some of the English language newspapers that are published in various places around the world. We've hired people from all kinds of English language newspapers, various nationalities. Just to be clear, the AP's staff is not all American. We have people working for the AP from about 100 different countries and who speak about 120 or so different languages. And so our goal is not to have a bunch of people who look like me planted all around the world. And we hire a lot of folks locally because they know their territory, they know their country, they know their area. If you have a skill or a knowledge about a particular area of the world, really dive in on that. If you have a language and you can understand a culture, really dive in on that. And that will make you much more marketable. There really isn't much, it's like everything else. A specialization will help you far more than a snap brim fedora and a trench coat.
What is your opinion actually on the fact that they take AP stories or whatever stories they get, and you turn on any one of those news programs and there's a huge spin on it? It's just the O'Reilly factor and someone's big half-hour opinion.
I'll give you a hint. Most people who answer questions for a living won't take a loaded one like that. But I think I'll get it. I can get at what you're trying to ask. AP content gets distributed to places all around the world, and we don't always see exactly what gets done with it. Some of it's often translated into languages that I can't read. But we do insist that it not be distorted or made not factual, and that's true for any outlet that uses our material. What I meant by journalism not being a place for your expressions of personal artistic creativity is that you run across a lot of people who get all their knickers twisted when you are trying to engage them about a story in whatever format, because they think the most important thing is how they have expressed what it is that they want to express, and they completely left out of the conversation the audience. And there's been much too much of that in journalism, and the reporter is happy and the reader doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. And blogging and the ability to self-publish gives you an outlet for that. But this is a field for information. It doesn't have to be dull. It doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to be awful. It can be interesting. It should be interesting. Your job is to reach out and make people want to get to the information you have. And that is not the same as indulging your interest in curlicues. That's all I meant.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I noticed that a lot of the pictures you show, and in my own personal experience, AP reporters are flying solo, and I was just wondering, to what extent are they expected to be like robo-reporters and have, their video and their laptops and blah, 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 and just do it all on their own, and what kind of support they have?
People need to specialize, but they also need to be able to, you don't want to specialize to the exclusion of all the formats. If you are at the scene of a news event and you are the only person there, sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not. We're not always as Lone Ranger as you may think, but you have an obligation to take a picture if you have one, or call back to the office and say, I see someone here with a camera. We even put out little cards that we give to the staffers so they can buy the rights to pictures and video from from citizens when we see them. But if you say, I am only a text journalist, or I am only a photographer, or I am only a camera person, you are specializing yourself right out of the full range of life's experiences, and probably specializing yourself right out of a job. It's just too narrow a view. The obligation for AP reporters and photographers and camera people is to make sure that all the formats are served, and if they can do it themselves, fine. If not, they need to coordinate with their colleagues to make sure it gets done.
Thank you.
Well, let's say the picture that was just taken by the gentleman who just stepped outside and took the picture of the spaceship blowing up. How much did they get for that?
Well, our business arrangements with people when we buy content from them are confidential. If we think it has lasting value for our archives, where it can be used over and over again, it's obviously going to be worth more to us, and therefore to them, out of fairness to them, than a picture that is really good for one day but doesn't have any lasting value. But the contracts are very fair to people, and we've never had anybody be unhappy about them. The salaries for people depend. We have in the United States have guild contracts, that set minimums, just like most guild contracts do. And outside the United States, we are governed in part by guild contracts in some places where that is the law. But in all cases, our salaries and payments are intended to be fair in a competitive marketplace, and so that people can make a living and want to work for us. We're not interested in paying people so little that they don't want to work for us. We want good journalists to work for us.
Last week I saw a published photograph of a man leaping off of a building in Lewiston, Maine, eventually being tackled by the photographer who took the initial picture. I was just wondering if you can comment on this activity.
Sure. You know, I think most people have a pretty fine sense of when you are a journalist and when you are a human being. The fellow who took the picture said he just acted on instinct and saw something bad happening and tackled the guy. That's a really individual call. I mean, our job is to be observers, but we have a lot of photographers who are on the scene of some horrible thing, and they take their pictures, and then if they see that somebody needs help in a rescue, they'll pick up a stretcher and help carry it. And you know, it's not what you go into the business to do, but you're a human being. What are you going to do? Justify, no, I'm going to let them drop the thing because I'm an observer? I think we have to be humans, too.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Being that AP is the mother of journalism and getting it right and advocacy, I would like to know, for those of us who have to be in the forefront of taking a hit, can you remember a memorable moment that AP or a journalist that you know of took a hit for being scrutinized for a story they printed? And for those of us who are coming up, you have Dan Rather and Katie Couric who are also being, looked at really closely for their journalism ethics and whatnot. How will we have to take a hit, and what would you suggest to us if we do take a hit for a story we put out?
Well, we've certainly taken our lumps for a lot of things over the years, and if you look at the questions and the tenor of the questions that we are asked about our coverage in Iraq, it's always, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, we were being asked, why aren't you doing more good news stories? And our answers to those questions have remained the same, but the questions have changed. The society's view of the conflict has changed. You just have to be sure of yourself and that you're doing the right thing. Our answers then and now are, it's great that there's a schoolroom that's been painted, but the city of Baghdad is out of control, and people don't have electricity 18 hours a day, and they don't have water, and children in Baghdad are dying by the dozens every day, and we feel that is the more important story. Doesn't mean we won't do the good news stories from time to time, but we've made what we believe is a reasoned and fair judgment. We re-examine those decisions from time to time just to make sure that we're still right and calibrate if we need to. And you're going to get attacked by people who don't see the world the way you do. You just have to know that you've done your job and that your facts are straight. The most important thing you can do for your credibility is to bang on your theories and bang on your reporting and bang on your assertions before you publish them, because people are going to bang on them pretty hard after you've published.
Thank you. Do you know of any examples of somebody that's made it even though they didn't have clips originally, and what did they do to handle that?
Why don't you have clips from your internship?
Well, if let's say they
and if it's because they made you do coffee, circulate the names of those places, and you guys don't go there because you're supposed to get clips out of internships.
Yeah, there are some of those, but how about also of those people that didn't take internships because they weren't smart enough to do so?
One of the things that I encounter sometimes with students, especially in New York, is the keen desire to stay in New York. That's such a mistake. Small newspapers are growing and thriving, and you can just get so much more done there, and people might be more willing to take a chance on you at a place like that, and you can learn so much more. And to the degree that any of you, I'm sure none of you have this problem, but to the degree that any of you have this I can only work in New York idea, it's extraordinarily limiting because the opportunities for you are fewer, the competition is fiercer, and the jobs you're going to be able to do are going to be smaller than the ones you can do in a smaller news organization out in the real world.
Okay, thank you.
It seems to me that there's certain news that gets unbelievable coverage, like for instance, the situation that's happening in Iraq. But there are unbelievable situations that's happening right in the Western Hemisphere, like per se in Haiti, that no one ever hears about, that never gets any coverage. And I wonder, why is it one particular story gets played on more than another, when, in my opinion, they're both extremes. I hear a lot about Darfur, but I never hear anything about Haiti.
All right, let me ask you a question first. Where do you read AP content?
I basically read it off the internet or from professors who gives them to me.
Just AP is a wholesaler. We are what they call a B2B business. We have news reports of enormous volume, and we send those to other news outlets, and they publish what we give them, and they make selections on what we give them that they're going to publish. So if you're not seeing things about Haiti, it's much more likely that it is the gatekeeper who is making those choices, because I can assure you we have a lot of coverage from Haiti. We have a very robust bureau in the Caribbean and people all over that region, including Haiti, and we write quite a bit about it.
The second question is, I'm more interested in finding out how to take an AP story and make it interesting for the youth.
It's interesting that you raised the question about young readers, because in the audience are two people who were part of a grand and glorious experiment that the AP conducted over the last couple of years, trying to reach specifically young readers with a product we called ASAP. And it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, you won't like this story, but one of my favorite stories early on was a video piece they did on little dancing condom rings, and they wrote their own music for it and everything. It was so un-AP, I just loved it. But we started out aiming for young readers and discovered pretty quickly that that was condescending, and what we really needed to be doing was attacking stories in a much more interesting way, and then they were interesting to everybody. So that's been the great lesson for us, and been the way that we are infecting those interesting storytelling values throughout the AP. And it's not all dancing condom rings, but
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Do you think print journalism is going to be around for a long time? Do you think, in the face of new technology, it's going to, maintain its presence in the news world?
Well, I think print journalism is going to be around for a good while, because there are plenty of people who like the tactile experience of holding paper, and who feel that it's easier to page through something that's paper than not. But I would encourage you to not be so focused on the container, as we like to say around the office. What's more important is the quality of the questions you are asking, the way you are framing things, and the information that you're presenting to people. You don't want to close off your information to people who don't like paper. And I think there's an unquenchable thirst for information. And if we can get over what format that information arrives in and deliver the quality information, there's a future for us for decades to come.
Thank you.
Would you say there's a credible threat to agencies like the Associated Press, where more people try to get their news from independent sources and just people blogging, or do you feel that the status of the AP is still safe?
We have a partnership with a collection of citizen journalists called Now Public, and that has proved to be an enrichment to our work from time to time. It has not yet blossomed as much as we would hope, because guess what? Reporting is hard. We had the Now Public has a cadre of thousands of people who are willing to go out and report on things when it occurs in their area, but sometimes it's inconvenient for their schedules. Sometimes when it's bad weather, they're worried about going out. So, we have people who teed up to take pictures for us if something bad happens, but they get nervous and they only want to take pictures outside their house window, which turns out to be of limited value. People who like to blog and ask questions in their blogs, that's another great avenue, but often they are blogging on information that has come from reporting from somewhere. So I don't see it as an either or. I do think it is a healthy extension of what we do, and a welcome one, but there's not enough real boots on the ground reporting going on by citizens yet to make me worry. And I wouldn't worry, I would actually welcome it, because I think more reporting done by whomever is good for society.
I have two questions. One is, what kind of qualifications and credentials does the AP look for? And the second one is, do you think that a name brand education is important for people that want to establish themselves in the field of media, such as like Columbia University versus City College?
It's really interesting. I have a friend who went to an Ivy League college, and he and I were both hiring at a different organization, and I laughed and said, you know, I always look at where people worked in their clips, and you look at their college first. And I think I'm right. No, I don't think it makes any difference. It will to some hiring managers who have that as something of interest to them, but it's never, you know, as far as I know, it hasn't impeded me. I don't know, someday it might, but the kind of experience you want to have, though, is one where you can, we usually ask for people to have a couple of years at a daily news organization, just so the ramp up to AP speed is not so intense. It's pretty hard to go from school to AP speed without sort of getting the instincts of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, of how you do your job, so where they're a little more ingrained. There are exceptions, but it's important to note that they are exceptions. So we ask people to have either a couple of years of daily newspaper, or at a television station, or at a magazine with a website. Well, we hire from a lot of websites now, because that is a pace that's more like AP.
Okay, and then like your reporters that are full-time, like how many pieces do they usually produce, maybe like weekly or monthly? I'm sure it ranges,
really depends on where they are. You know, there are people who are turning out 2 or 3 different things a day, and some doing one a day, and some doing one on one story, but providing different updates a day, and you know, sports reporters who are doing 2 or 3 different versions as a game progresses. But, you know, crafting one photograph or one lovingly edited video piece or one very long story and then going, ta-da, generally is not the norm.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. And my question is that in the event that a reporter is presented with a news story in which they have vested interest, is it overwhelming for them to try to make their story as objective as possible, or is their experience in journalism eventually going to allow them to make the story objective?
You know, there are a couple of theories about ethics. Ours are pretty clear cut. If you think you're going, if you have an obvious conflict, you shouldn't be involved in the story. You need to hand it off to somebody else. And that's not just because there's a presumption that you're going to be unfair. It's to keep you and the AP from being accused of having a conflict of interest. You have to apply the same standards to those decisions that you would to a public official that you're writing about. If they, you know, if they have an appearance of a conflict of interest, that's a problem. That said, you're a human being. You know, you're going to have things that you're interested in. You know, I'll give you a cheesy example. I read the comics. I love the comics I read. I love the Washington Post because it has 3 pages of comics. I think you can really understand what's going on in the world. I was all upset, you know, several major characters in some of my favorite comic strips died in the last couple of months, and I was upset. And I thought, well, you know, we should have a story on this. And I thought, well, no, that's you know, probably going a little too far. But, you know, you're talking about conflicts that are much more serious than that, of course. But there are obvious ways if you have a connection. If your spouse or child or parent goes to work for a government official or a political candidate, you can't cover that candidate. You can't cover that race. You can't have anything to do with it. You can't direct coverage of it. And that's not because there's any presumption that you're going to do a bad thing, but why put you or the organization in that position? Okay. But, you know, if you like comic strips, you're probably okay.
What are some of the common mistakes that young reporters and journalists make and some advice that you would offer to them.
The common mistakes that are made in the AP are the ones that are made everywhere, and the ones that we need to change as an industry, and that is superficiality. You know, if you've done reporting on a story and you dump everything in your notebook into the story, then you haven't done your job. If you just go to something and have it pass in front of you and you write what happened, you haven't done your job. And there's way too much of that. There's way too much government says blah, 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 and we report that, and not really any thinking about what that means or why that is, or why they're still saying blah, 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 after, 2 years after they said it the first time.
What I've been wondering for a very long time is, how do you think that the press can steer the attentions of society back to what's more important? And do you think that the reason why people have been more interested in celebrities and sensationalism is because they've become jaded with some of the recent goings-on in the past 6 years?
Well, first, I think it's unreasonable, unfair, unrealistic, and just goofy for us to try and tell people what they should be interested in. You know, we're not their mothers. If they want to be interested in Britney Spears, why should we care? I mean, you know, she's bless her heart, she's a person who was made famous by public attention and is now crashing very publicly, and it's sad. And I think, you know, you can write about it in a measured way without having to, although you all seem completely fixated on this poor woman's underwear. Or lack of underwear, yes. You know, all of you have conducted yourselves, I'm sure, with complete decorum and good judgment at every step of your progression from the age of 17 to 25. You just haven't had a camera following you around, or 25 cameras following you around. I think our obligation is to present the world in all its wonderful, interesting facets in an interesting way. And sort of behind your question is, why aren't they interested in more serious stories? And as a profession, I think we've made more serious stories like castor oil over time. And for us to find ways, and there are lots of people doing it, and lots of people in the AP doing it, to get that attitude out of the system and say, hey, here's something that you really need to know, is much more of our obligation than worrying about some starlet's undergarments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to be with you today. Thank you very, very much. Great.